Hello, listeners. Lisa Starr and another episode of Starrcast, the wellness podcast. So, if you've been listening lately, you've heard us talk quite a bit about bathing culture, saunas, bathing. It's such a hot topic in the industry. Everyone's building a bathhouse, everybody wants to go to the sauna. It's exciting, but it's also kind of a new business model for us in the US. So today we have someone who can shed some light on the model, I think, for us. We are joined by Adam Bamba-Tanaka. He's the COO of Therme Group here in the US, and he has been working for Therme Group for 4 years. And I know he has a lot of knowledge about bathhouses, even though Therme doesn't have one open in the US yet, but that's about to change. So thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here. I just wish we were in a sauna, but that'll be next time.
I don't know if my recording equipment can survive in a sauna, but it would be fun to try it, at least a short one. So, Adam, I wanted to start with you, the person. You are a PhD from Harvard, very smart guy. I think your master's is from Harvard too. And you studied philosophy, I believe, as an undergrad. You studied urban planning. Like, tell us a little bit about the path that led you to where you are now.
Of course. Well, really, my passion ever since I was 17, 18 years old has been cities. I grew up in London, and my father's family, much of it is in Europe. So I had spent a lot of my childhood visiting cities, especially dense cities, and developing a passion for urban design and just how to make cities dynamic and exciting places to be. And being someone who was a bit more on the nerdier end of the spectrum, I absolutely adored writing my undergraduate thesis, which was all about urban redevelopment and urban revitalization in Bucharest, which is a funny thread that we'll pick up, about 10 years later. And then decided to pursue a PhD in urban planning. And really, my focus was on large scale public private development and innovation in cities. Essentially, how can the public and private sectors work together to create more dynamic, more inclusive cities? My particular focus during my PhD was more on the affordable housing side, but I also spent quite a lot of time teaching and running summer programs that were partnerships between city governments and universities focused on developing innovative ideas for the future of cities. So that led me, when I finished my PhD, I realized quite quickly, actually at the start of my PhD, I did not want to be an academic. I wanted to build cities. I wanted to be involved in the creation and the redevelopment of urban areas. And so that led me to a consulting company called HRNA, which really is an industry leader in the US for consulting on complex, large scale urban redevelopment projects. So while I worked at
Hmm.
HRNA, I worked on many different projects around the country, some even international, that again were about how can public and private and community stakeholders come together to reimagine cities and improve them for everyone. Therme ended up hiring HRNA actually in the depths of the pandemic to help them think about their US market entry strategy. And so that's was my first exposure to
Okay.
Therme, and absolutely adored, working with them as an advisor. And then ultimately that led to both myself and John Alschuler, our chairman, leaving HRNA to create Therme US and launch this business here in the US. The funny thread I would say
Understood.
in terms of my personal history is my family is kind of a crazy United Nations of different cultures, blended together. I've got a bit of Japanese on the grandfather's side, Brazilian, Texan, Romanian, French, and I grew up in the UK. So actually, from a young age, I've been exposed to bathing cultures in different places. And I was privileged enough to live in Japan in my 20s, where I really became obsessed with onsen culture and
Hmm.
reconnected with some of my cousins there, some of my family. So, what I find so amazing about Therme, which is something I never could have predicted, is it's kind of a marriage of both my passion for cities and how to create more exciting cities and new kinds of civic infrastructure that bring people together, as well as this kind of global heritage of bathing culture that actually connects to me in a very personal way. My grandfather grew up in Japan. He remembers and has told me stories about going to the Sento as a child. And then, I have other family in Central and Eastern Europe where also, of course, there's a thriving bathing culture. So the idea of being part of a movement to help bring some of these bathing cultures into America, or if anything, bring them back to America because they have been here thriving. Certainly 100 years ago there was a dip, but I think, as you mentioned at the start, we're having a very strong bounce back.
Well, it really takes someone with your background, I think, Adam. I mean in the multicultural part. Like, As a spa consultant and journalist and educator, I get to travel the world and see all of these different cultures. I've been in Tokyo in a bathhouse on a Saturday night at 10 p.m. and it's packed with young people. And I remember saying, wow, why don't we have this in the US? We didn't have these options. And I don't know why we didn't, but we're discovering it. And boy, is it catching on like crazy. It's interesting that you were studying in Bucharest. Did you say that's where you were doing some
Yes.
study?
So that is
And
a
is
very
that because of your Romanian family
That
connection?
is a very funny coincidence. Well, I was fascinated when I was in college with communist and post-communist cities, which people would say, wow, what a niche topic. But I would be like, no, that's about half the world, actually. In terms of the post-communist, and obviously some still communist. So I was really fascinated with how are cities designed and built differently under a communist regime, and then how
Mhm.
does that evolve and change in terms of urban development and land use patterns after a fall of communism as a transition into capitalism. And actually, Bucharest is a place that is a fascinating and actually quite tragic kind of case study for this question, because during the late period of the communist regime in Romania, the Ceausescu regime raised a huge portion of historic Bucharest. It's one of the largest peacetime urban renewal projects in history anywhere in the world. Completely demolished old churches, old Beaux-Arts neighborhoods to build essentially a copy of Pyongyang in North Korea. He was actually explicitly said he was inspired by how clean and organized, North Korea was. So that's what took me to Bucharest when I was a fresh-faced, 19, 20-year-old. The funny thing is, 10, 15 years later, I now go to Bucharest, 3 or 4 times a year to visit Therme's flagship resort, Therme Bucharest. And, I remember when I first started coming and telling some of my colleagues there, oh, yeah, I've been to Bucharest many times before. They would say, what?
What?
And, oh, yeah, I know all about this kind of strange neighborhood and so on and so forth. So it's a funny kind of overlap of, threads of life.
It's funny how life does that if you pay attention, and you pick up the next thread. So, Therma flagship, was that their first one in Bucharest?
So it was the first part of Therme Group's international expansion beyond Germany.
Okay.
The history of Therme is a little complex because there was an initial wave of development in the 90s and 2000s under an individual named Joseph Wund. He developed Therme Erding, which is now part of the Therme Group portfolio, as well as 4 other Therme resorts, mostly in southern and western Germany. He was
Mhm.
already at a fairly advanced age when he launched that business. I think he was in his 60s, and he was not interested in globalizing the concept or figuring out how to translate what he felt was a very German bathing product to a global international audience. And he was approached by various people over the years saying, you should take this to, the US, you should take this to
Mm.
wherever. And he would just say, no, 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 I like Germany, I understand Germany. Everyone gets naked in Germany, and I know how that works. I know that will be a complicated thing anywhere else. Therme Group CEO Robert Hanea met Joseph Fund, 15, 20 years ago, and really saw the potential of this concept to reach a global audience. That
Mm.
led to the development of Therme Bucharest under a partnership with Wund, as well as the creation of Therme Group to launch this business globally. So Therme Bucharest was in a way what we call the first Therme 2.0, taking the concept outside of its Germanic roots and origins and kind of laying the
I never
foundation.
understood that whole story, how they fit together. Good.
Exactly.
Thank you
And we
for
have a
that.
very strong and close partnership with the operations of the other thermal resorts in Germany. They're under a holding company called the Wund Foundation that we collaborate with frequently. I've been to visit all their resorts and met their teams. So there's a very close partnership. But essentially, you can think Therma 1.0, purely German, Therma 2.0, the international expansion that started with Bucharest and ultimately led to the establishment of Therma US, Therma Canada, Therma Asia, Therma UK, et cetera, et cetera.
So, Therma Bucharest, when did it open, Adam?
It opened in 2016.
So, you're 9 years in. I have not been, but I know people who have who've said it's spectacular. And it's also massive. Like, could you give us a little sense of the scale of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about 300,000 square feet under roof, but there's also a very, very large outdoor area that includes what we call the beach. It's the largest urban beach in Europe. That during the summer you have all sorts of activations, experiences, food and beverage. There's a large pool area outside as well. But to give you a sense of scale, I mean, It welcomes 1.6, 1.7 million visitors a year. On a busy day, it has 10,000 people. It's the
A
largest
day, in a
a
day.
day in a day. That's not every day. That's some days, but it can be a busy day can hit about 10K, and it's the largest visitor attraction in Central and Eastern Europe. The second most visited water park in Europe. We don't like to call ourselves a water park, but that's how we get categorized. The
Sure.
first most visited being Therme Oeding, our other property outside Munich, which is even bigger than
Really?
Therme Bucharest. Believe it or
Wow.
not, it's almost twice the size in terms of built footprint than Therme Bucharest. But Therme Bucharest, in some respects, represents the evolution of that. As I mentioned, the German concept. It's clothed. The food and beverage offering is, I would say, more sophisticated. And the overall design and concept, because it was built all at once, is, I think, a little bit more elevated than Therme Oeding, which was built over many years. So, when we want to take stakeholders from the US to understand our concept, we tend to take them to Therme Bucharest. It's the newest, and also it doesn't require them, stripping to nothing.
It is hard to take off your clothes next to a person you may do business with.
Yes,
Still, that's still a little bit awkward
might
for
make it
the.
easier to do business. Who knows? But.
So, was it busy right away? Like, did it take Bucharest a little bit of time for the neighborhood to catch on?
No, it was a massive success right away. I believe in the first year of operations, it welcomed over 1 million people, which is pretty much unprecedented in the attractions industry. And it
Hmm.
has continued to be massively successful. Frankly, if anything, it's too successful because on some of those 10,000 people days, personally, I absolutely love it when it's really crowded. But I know that others, find it maybe too congested or not maybe correlating to what they believe, wellness experience should be. Again, on those busy days. On an average day, it's very spacious and it's very relaxing. So there is an expansion that is tentatively planned for Therme Bucharest to, capitalize on how large the market is there. And one of the things that's been extraordinary about Therme Bucharest is it's become a massive international tourist attraction as well. So currently we have about 40% of our visitors who come from the UK, from Italy, from France, from Israel, and that is extraordinary, because Romania was not a place that had a significant tourism.
No,
I mean,
no, not known as a tourist spot.
Particularly in Bucharest, there is more, kind of nature-oriented tourism in the north, Transylvania, etc., which is stunning. But many people literally fly to Bucharest, spend the whole day in the spa, and leave. There was a whole series of viral videos from last year of British influencers saying, for the price of a spa day in London, I can get on a plane, fly to Bucharest, spend the whole day, fly on a plane home, and have a much better time because literally this spa is like 20 times bigger than anything I'd ever seen in my life.
What's the next one after Bucharest?
So the next one after Bucharest is going to be Therme Manchester, which just broke ground about a month ago.
Hmm.
It's about almost twice the size of Therme Bucharest, and it is the first expansion of the concept outside of continental Europe. And it's an extraordinary location adjacent to one of the biggest and busiest shopping malls in England, and just a stone's throw from Old Trafford, where Manchester United plays. So I think we're going to have
Right.
a heavy kind of sports fan contingent on game days and maybe before and after. So that project is scheduled to open in about 2 to 3 years, and then after that, there's a broader pipeline in Toronto, in Dubai. There's a project in Frankfurt. Um, South Korea, and of course our two publicly announced in the US projects in Dallas and Washington, D.C.
So yes, let's get to the US. I've seen the Washington information and site and Dallas as well. Are they going to open concurrently? That's a lot to manage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We wouldn't even wish that upon ourselves, but we do like to do hard things. Currently, the thinking is that the Dallas location would open first and the DC location would open second. The Dallas location, we're already well advanced on our approvals process, and it's a
Good.
privately owned piece of land that has no environmental contamination, which translates to, faster speed of execution. Plus, in Texas, people are very proud of, the speed of business and making big things happen. In DC, the site is also an extraordinary site along the river, but it is a publicly owned site that has not only some contamination, but also some existing government facilities that need to be relocated. So that just,
Mhm.
creates some further time in the development schedule, but it allows us to build Dallas, get Dallas right, make all the mistakes that we need to make on Dallas, which I'm sure we'll make, and then make sure that none of them get repeated in DC. And, in terms of our construction operation, there's certain efficiencies in staggering them.
Well, this is, needless to say, a massive project. Could you give us an idea of the scale of Dallas and where it will be exactly?
Absolutely. So I'm incredibly excited about the Dallas project. Actually, my mother grew up in Dallas. I still have a lot of family in Dallas. So for me, it's something very personally meaningful to be able to bring this, project to Dallas. Actually, my grandmother worked for Neiman Marcus, and the site that we have are in the process of acquiring is just a stone's throw from downtown Dallas, not too far from the original Neiman Marcus store. It's in a neighborhood called the Cedars, which is a kind of RC neighborhood, kind of on the edge of downtown Dallas. And what's incredible about the site that we're in the process of acquiring is we are going to be basically at the intersection of downtown Dallas with its iconic skyline. I actually think Dallas has one of the coolest skylines
Mm.
in the country, very underrated, especially at night. It looks amazing. And we are going to be facing the Trinity River, which is the historic course of the river, that led to the founding of Dallas and the siting of Dallas. Actually, adjacent to our property are two ponds, more like small lakes, that are actually remnants of the original course of the Trinity River. And all of our concepts, if you've seen images, and maybe there's a way to share some images with the listeners, it's all about what we call blue and green spaces, huge thermal pools, but also an incredible tree canopy of 1,000 to 2,000 fully mature trees that are indoors. It's kind of like a botanical garden. In fact, in most places that we open, we're the largest botanical garden in the country by some factor. So for us, being adjacent to a natural body of water as well as a very green environment is something that is really, really additive to the customer experience and to the
Mhm.
overall concept. And one thing I will say, as someone who spent a lot of time in Dallas, there's not that much authentic nature that is left within the core of the Dallas, metroplex. It's a lot of highways, it's a lot of, lawns, it's a lot of single family homes, it's a lot of strip malls. What's amazing about this particular part of Dallas is you have an incredibly authentic natural ecosystem and habitat that when our customers are sitting in the pools and sitting in the saunas, they will look out onto essentially a natural oasis. And I think for people within Dallas, that is something incredibly unique. And actually, we've done some polling where people are saying totally, 70% of the people who responded to our poll said this isn't an area I would necessarily come to for a large attraction typically, because in Dallas, typically the large attractions are on the edge of the
Mhm.
metro. Six Flags and so on. But when they understood the connection to nature, they said, we completely get why this is here and this can
Mhm.
only be here. And really for Therme, we want these projects to be civic assets. So they're operated 365 days a year, 14 hours a day, serving a diverse audience in terms of income and gender and age. And so being located kind of in a site where 50 years ago you might have put an opera house or you might have put a museum, that really is the kind of site that we want to be in to be a civic asset that is accessible. It'll be accessible by light rail and it'll be accessible by multiple freeways that literally intersect right above the site. So that's what led to the choice of that location. In terms of scale, we're looking at about a 450,000 square foot approximately building under roof, but then there's also going to be a very, very large outdoor area, about the same size as the indoor area is going to be outdoors, where you're going to have pools and outdoor saunas and relaxation gardens and restaurants. And again, we're targeting a visitation volume a little north of Therme Bucharest. Dallas is actually more than twice the size of Bucharest in terms of a market and a bigger tourism
Mm.
share as well. So we're looking at about 1.8 to 2 million people visiting the facility every year, on a busy day around 12,000 guests. And again, distributed across our areas. I'm not sure if I
Mm.
mentioned we have a family area, an adult pool area, and an adult sauna area. So it'll be a really varied experience for the visitor.
12,000 guests. That's a lot of towels, Adam.
It's a lot of towels. Well, what works well in our facilities in Europe, and we're likely to keep it this way, is we encourage the guests to bring their own towels. There will be
Hmm.
towels available for rent, of course, but that's a way to obviously minimize some of the laundry load
For sure.
and encourage people to also use the facility a bit as their own space, somewhere that they come on a more habitual basis. We're almost at the intersection between a pampered spa day and a theme park experience. And so,
Hmm.
if we made everything super pampered, the price point would become too high, for us to be able to attract the volume of people that we need to be able to attract. And there is a significant portion of the business that is a family audience. And so, there, of course, we need to be very mindful of as well of, the overall spend and making sure it's affordable for a family.
Well, yes. I mean, it's interesting what you said earlier about being classified as an attraction. I mean, this is like building an amusement park or a mall or something. The scale of it is much different than building a spa or a fitness facility typically. Obviously takes a lot more planning and money. I mean, when I looked at the numbers for Manchester, I mean, the projection was, I think, 450 million pounds, to build that. I mean, could you talk to us about how you make that happen in a day when an owner, like a single owner who wants to open a bathhouse, can't get money from the bank because they're single-use facilities? We're seeing a lot of challenges with that. So you've
Yeah.
obviously found the secret. Could you
Yeah.
share a little bit about how does that work?
Well, let me say a few things. First of all, investors and lenders want to see is evidence that your concept works. Our concept has been operating now for 26 years with very, very, very low cyclicality, very, very high consistency across years. We basically never had a year except COVID where we had a dip in visits
Mm,
across the resorts. So the track record is impeccable. We're also not a seasonal business. Many attractions are a seasonal business. And we're also not a family oriented business purely. We're an intergenerational proposition, which means we don't suffer those dips, during school holidays. And because we're an indoor outdoor concept, we're incredibly popular in the summer, we're incredibly popular in the winter. So we have the, many years of track record to demonstrate, the consistency and the profitability of the business. The other thing I would say is, volume is accretive to our margins. We're a very high volume business. And, at a certain point, the marginal additional customer has almost zero impact to our expense load because we're already heating the building, we're already
mm.
operating the saunas, the pools, etc. So we're a relatively high margin business compared to your conventional spa, especially a spa which focuses on individual treatments, which we have that, but that's definitely not a focus of the business. And the third thing I would say is we have over the past year raised very significant third party capital to support the international expansion. We executed a transaction earlier this year with a PE fund called CVC Partners. They're the fifth largest private equity group in the world, dominant in Europe. And they have purchased a 50% stake in Therme Bucharest and Therme Erding, valuing the overall Therme portfolio at €1 billion. So,
Hmm.
1.3 or so billion dollars. And they've put some capital in to support the development of Manchester. So think about capitalizing these facilities less as a correlate to bathhouses and more as a correlate to financing, a Disney theme park or a Universal theme
Hmm.
park with decades of track record behind them, demonstrating, the capability of the business and the strong fundamentals of the business. And I would even venture to say that we have advantages relative to the conventional theme park business because of our intergenerational audience and because of our low seasonality.
That's fascinating. I appreciate what you said about the margin. You are already heating the building and staffing it. At what utilization is your magic number? Like, where do you need to get with guests on that 10,000 a day scale for the numbers to make sense?
No, it's a great question. It really depends by facility because of the operating cost load and just overall scale, and kind of the curve varies facility by facility. But I would say once we're hitting an average probably of 60 to 70% utilization in terms of overall capacity, and 10,000, mind you, is like the building is bursting. We don't want to be at 10,000 every day. It really strains our operational team. And
Mm.
as I mentioned, it can have negative impacts on customer satisfaction. So we're not striving to be at 10,000 people every day. I mean, that would be wonderful if that happened. But, that what's great is because we're a 365-day a year business, people come back on a repeat basis to experience the facility in different kinds of, times of day and
Mm.
year. So in our existing facilities, we see that residents come on average 2.5 times a year That might mean that sometimes they're coming on a weekday morning when it's quiet,
Mm.
sometimes on a a busy weekend, or maybe on a weekday evening, which is kind of the middle ground.
Will you offer memberships, at least at your US facilities? We're kind of used to that model.
Yeah, we haven't made a firm decision on that. Maybe there'll be a hybrid model with some sort of membership element, but really where a pay-as-you-go model, more
Hmm.
akin to, again, a theme park, but where you're paying by the hour. So typically we have a minimum ticket of 3 hours, and then depending on how much longer you stay, you pay an incremental tariff on that base fee. And we don't gouge people for staying longer. In fact, we want people to stay longer. They spend more on food and drink. They have more treatments. They end up, having more fun. That's all great for us. So really, it's a pay as you go on the hour and a pay as you go on the area. Some people choose to just go in the family area. That's our lowest price point ticket. Some people might choose to go in our sauna area, which buys you access to all the other zones, but that is, our highest price point ticket. And again, as I mentioned, some people might come with their family on a Saturday, just go in the family zone, come back 2 weeks later on a Thursday evening with some friends, decide to go in the adult zone. It'll be a different price point, but also, it'll be normalized based on the length, the stay.
Well, in a 400,000 square foot facility with 8,000 people in it, how do you manage who goes where?
Well, we very, very carefully monitor capacity, which is driven by locker load and locker count. So we can't have more people in the building than we have lockers. Otherwise, no one has anywhere to put their clothes. And we
Hmm.
very, very carefully monitor also utilization within the different areas. And again, because we have this 25 years of track record, there's a very good understanding of kind of the interconnected nature of these different areas and customer propositions. So that, for instance, during the week and on the weekday evenings, our family areas tend to be more lightly utilized, which means we actually are incentivized to drive adult traffic into the family zones. And to be clear, the family zones are amazing for an adult. There's thermal pools, there's steam rooms, there's, also really cool water slides if you want to do that. But there's a lot of the base elements that you have in the adult zones are also in the family zones. So, a lot of it is that. And then a lot of it is also activating those outdoor areas to pull people outdoors through programming, through pop-up experiences, through food experiences, through cultural experiences. And we have classes that are offered within our indoor areas, within our pools and so on. So we very strategically program the facility to kind of manage the flow and the capacity and ensure that, areas aren't becoming totally rammed, right?
And what you must have some physical means of access to certain areas based on what you paid.
Oh yeah, there's a turnstile between the family area and the two adult areas, as well as between the lockers and what we call the wet areas. So we do have ways to control flow there as well. But it's not meant to be something that appears as a huge barrier. Obviously,
Sure.
we want to incentivize people to explore more and to discover more aspects of the experience. So for us, it's fantastic if people are moving between different zones. We estimate that about 25% of our customers either stay longer than they intended to or upcharge into a higher priced area than they intended to. And for us, obviously, that is an incredible signal of just how compelling the customer experience is.
That's a great number. I have been to some facilities where you have an RFID bracelet that controls your locker and your access. And then if you're there longer, it seems to be able to track that and charge you
Totally.
accordingly.
So
Yeah,
we've
those
developed
systems are
actually our
great.
own in-house POS system. Everything is done on an RFID wristband. It's obviously additive to the customer experience because obviously in a bathing suit you don't want to be carrying around a credit card or cash, but it also contributes to the seamlessness of the overall operation. And you use the same wristband to access your locker, to access your treatments, to access food and beverage, and to access any other area that you want to go into.
And you get amazing data as a result, I'm sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's how we know these things about how long people are staying, where people upcharge. And also, one thing I should mention that is core to our experience is the food and beverage offering. Many spas and bathhouses either have a minimal or non-existent food and beverage offer, but for us, people are spending 6 to 8 hours on average per visit. They're having at least one meal, if not two. And because of the scale of our concept, as well as the segmentation across the different areas, we can offer a really, really broad array of dining experiences, something akin to a Disney World in terms of, fine white tablecloth dining on one end with, full service all the way to a kind of buffet style, fast casual environment for the family zone. And we actually have many adult visitors who come in, see the high-end restaurant, say, oh, that looks great, but not for today. I don't have enough time, or I don't want to spend that much. I'm going to move into the family zone and get myself something to eat from the fast casual outlet.
So, how many people does it take to operate the facility on a busy day?
On a busy day, 200 to 300 people on site. And most of our largest facilities employ around 500 people.
And of those 300 people, how many are like, what percentage would you say are going around and picking up towels and pushing water around, and which are working at the welcome desk, say?
Well, I mean, it's a very detailed and complex staffing structure, and actually, a lot of the cleaning happens at night. I mean, throughout the day, we have a very large, I'll call them a tactical cleaning team who are going around, getting the towels. But again, most people bring their own towels, so we're not like
Hmm.
stealing people's towels. But there's certainly a focus on cleaning up any spillages, making sure the floor isn't slippery, etc. But every single evening from 11 p.m. when the facility closes to 8 a.m. the next morning when we prepare for reopening, every single evening, 365 days a year, we have 50 to 70 cleaning staff who come in, scrub every single locker, every single sauna, every single doorway, every single pool with robotic pool cleaners, every single window at the ground level, every single table in the food and beverage areas. And that's part of what keeps the facility so pristine, and also means that while you're there, you're not seeing armies of people cleaning up around you, which also isn't particularly conducive to relaxing. We do have a sort of front desk cashier model, though increasingly we're shifting towards a contactless and booking system in our newer facilities. And we have a significant food and beverage operation in terms of headcount, given the volumes of customers that we see. We're serving 3 to 4 thousand meals a day on average. So it's not insignificant.
So those restaurants, you operate them, they're not licensed.
Yes, we insource in Therme Bucharest and the future resorts. The food and beverage is insourced and managed in-house. In some of the German resorts, the food is outsourced, and part of that was a decision that was made kind of before the establishment of Therme Group by the original development team. But we really feel that the food and beverage experience is very integral to the overall wellness proposition, and it can't feel out of sync. The wellness culture that is being encouraged within the rest of the resort. So we insource, and we kind of soft brand with internal brands.
Well, that's so true. I mean, we know that if we feed people, they stay longer.
Exactly.
And when you give them options, they love that. So
Exactly.
could you say what percentage of revenue comes from F&B?
Yeah, something like 30 to 35%.
So a significant portion.
Yeah,
And certainly more labor intensive, that part, but also, the effect on ROI is keeping the guests longer or return
absolutely.
visits, et cetera.
And we're very, very
Interesting.
strategic about, the expense load on the food and beverage side of things. We are looking into various aspects related to automation. And already in our existing resorts, we have a very efficient system where typically in the family area and the adult relaxation zone, in basically the lower price parts of the resort, which represent about 80% of the floor area, the ordering is done by a digital kiosk. So it's highly efficient. You order a digital
Mm,
kiosk, you get a printed receipt, you take that to a window, you get your food. So it's a very, very high turnover and a very high throughput.
that's smart. So many questions I have. The back of house part, the water, the cleaning, the maintenance. I mean, how do you manage that when you're open 7 days a week?
Well, that's the most important part of the entire experience and the foundation on which everything stands. Both in Therme Erding and in Therme Bucharest, we have deep well geothermal heat and water. So it's about a 3 kilometer deep dedicated geothermal well. Both locations were partly selected for their geothermal capabilities. The origins of Therme Erding was, a site that was known to have strong geothermal properties. And within Bucharest, when the leadership of Therme Group was evaluating potential sites, they were partly drawn to our site, not just for its accessibility, but also because of its geothermal potential. So there is a very significant and very sophisticated back of house environment with both the geothermal as well as water filtration, as well as a whole subterranean technological infrastructure to support the indoor botanical environment and all of the palm trees and other trees that you
Mm.
have within the resort. So every single tree actually has its own essentially monitoring system to monitor
Mm-hmm.
nutrients, monitor water, and also to deliver, more nutrients and more water on a dynamic basis based on essentially a kind of AI, AI evaluation and monitoring system. So it's very, very sophisticated. It's one of the things that we're most proud of. It's one of the things that sets us most apart from your classic water park is the focus on, the quality of that technological and technical infrastructure. We use a very minimal amount of chlorine, for instance, in treating our pools and use an ozone osmosis process that doesn't produce odors and actually is much less chemically toxic than chlorine. So that is something that as soon as people walk into our resorts, they immediately sense, wow, I'm not smelling the chlorine. Like, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So, because chlorine and wellness aren't really things that go together
No.
in my mind. So that's something that we're very excited about. But, ultimately for our customers, we want them to not think about the back of house. The back of
Mm-hmm.
house should be invisible. The magic of that kind of botanical environment and tropical ecosystem, as well as these seemingly infinite thermal pools. We don't want people thinking too much about the piping. And one of the things, again, that sets us apart so much, when you look at our images of our interior spaces, there are no HVAC ducts, there's no piping that is going across the ceiling, there's no visible HVAC systems. That is very distinctive, especially for such a large space and such a large volume. And it's something that we're incredibly proud of.
Oh, you should be. And it does make the space more beautiful. And as you say, kind of takes the back of house away from people. We don't want them to focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
Needless to say, I would assume that Dallas and Washington are not built on top of geothermal water sources. They were selected for other reasons. So your back of house will look a little bit different there.
Well, we haven't made a firm decision about whether geothermal will or will not be possible. We've been looking at the potential for geothermal, but we can also offer the experience without geothermal. So it's something that's still under review. But we've
Mm.
got kind of day one, day two option, and either one will work well for us. And I don't think
So
that
let,
I don't think the customer in the US is as sensitized to this issue of mineral and thermal waters as a European customer is. Um,
I
European
would agree, yes.
European spa enthusiasts are very focused on certain kinds of accreditations and
Hmm.
understanding, the mineral properties of the water. And I think, it's not such an expectation here.
No, at least not yet, anyway.
Yes.
Let's talk about the other amazing projects you have on the roadmap going forward. I mean, I've seen pictures of what's proposed in Dubai. That looks pretty incredible, which frankly it has to be if you're going to open something in Dubai, it has to be over the top. Does that have a firm site or date, or is that still just a concept?
Yeah, yeah. A site has been identified and confirmed with the government of Dubai, and we're hoping to open within the next 1 to 2 years. So that's being managed by a separate arm of Therme Group. There's a team that's based, in Dubai full time that is managing the project. But we're very, very excited about the project. And as you say, in the context of Dubai, iconic architecture is paramount, as well as we wanted to deliver something that had some verticality, something that could compete and
Hmm.
contribute to an already dynamic and iconic skyline.
Did you say it would open in 1 to 2 years?
That is the timeline that we have projected. And in Dubai, they like to do things very, very quickly. So
Well,
let's see where we go.
let's see where we go is right. And
Actually, I
what
think I
else is
misspoke. It might be a 2028. I think it might be a 2028 opening.
okay?
Yeah.
What else is on the pipeline? I think you said Canada, something in Canada?
Yep. So we have a project on the Toronto waterfront, a location called Ontario Place. That's going to be a very large facility with an extraordinary site overlooking the lakefront of Ontario. Then there's a site that has been announced and confirmed in South Korea near the
Mm.
airport of Incheon, overlooking the South China Sea. So that's going to be also quite spectacular. There's a location in Frankfurt that Therme Group has been working on for several years. So we're excited to also advance that because that would lead to complete, servicing the full spectrum of the German market. Right now, Therme
Mhm.
is more oriented towards the southern and western parts of Germany. Frankfurt would help consolidate, the exposure to the German customer. And there are other fun irons in the fire that we hope to announce in the next few months to years as well.
If the ratio of sauna to pool, if there's a formula that you go on, and if that will differ in the US, given that we're kind of sauna novices now, although you're building for the future.
I don't think it's going to vary massively. Romania was also not a big sauna culture, a big sauna market. And so we saw, in fact, in Romania that we undersupplied the amount of saunas because we were nervous that the sauna culture wouldn't take, and it's actually performed very well. And, I don't know if this is of interest to discuss, but we just did this incredible sauna and bathing festival in Washington, D.C. this past
Wanted
weekend.
to ask you about that
It's
because
probably
I'm
the
glad you brought
longest
it up.
sauna and bathing festival that's ever been done, in the Northeast, and it was massively popular, massively successful. And I think it's one of these things: bathing culture knows no borders, so people just need to be exposed to it, and they pretty much immediately become, addicted to it. And so I think there's actually a greater risk to under delivering. Ultimately, we're all in this business because we believe in the power of these kinds of experiences. So to hold back on what makes us distinctive, I think would be a mistake.
For sure. The bathing festival was just last week, I believe, and you held it at the site of where the DC location will be
Yeah, it's
built.
just a stone's throw from the DC location that we're in discussions with the District of Columbia about. It's actually a location that is frequently used for events and festivals. So it's a
Mm.
place that's already somewhat on the radar of residents as a place to go have fun. But, the owner of it's called Sandlot, the owner of Sandlot said, I had never seen anything like this before, in terms of this kind of bathing experience. And, we're going to be doing some surveys of our attendees, but I would guess about 50 to 60% of our visitors had never been in anything but a gym sauna, if any sauna at all. So having this kind of social bathing experience where we had Aufguss, aromatherapies, Venic, Banya treatments was something completely new for the vast majority of the visitors. And it really was a way for us to tease a little bit of the Therme concept and get people excited about the project, which still isn't opening for a few years to come, but also as a way to start to showcase and build partnerships with the local community around how the neighborhood and the district at large will infuse the Therme concept with a local flavor. So we had a whole bunch of local wellness vendors who were selling products. And we also did some really interesting partnerships with local cultural leaders to infuse the bathing experience with a kind of DC flavor. So we had an immersive projection of murals from around Southeast DC that was projected onto a
Mm.
sauna, and it was a translucent sauna, so you could actually sit inside and have the murals washing over your skin. And then we also worked with a local poet who led poetry readings and poetry kind of group. I don't want to call it a workshop, but basically a group poetry reading that was also
Mm.
held within one of the saunas. So that was a really exciting way to kind of connect our concept into a local context.
Well, it's a very clever marketing idea and does get the excitement up, but it doesn't sound like something easy to do to produce pools and sauna where there are none. I mean, how do you manage that?
Well, for this particular event, we basically engaged with the growing and very diverse and exciting mobile sauna,
Hmm.
sector within the U.S., which is growing rapidly. So we had mobile saunas coming from Michigan, from Minnesota, from Rhode Island, all different designs, different sizes, different aesthetics. And then we had bathing practitioners who came from also all around the US, including a couple from Finland who were doing different kinds of activations and experiences. And we had a beautiful cold plunge as well as bucket showers. So we didn't have, a very large pool, obviously on the scale of Therme, but our goal here wasn't to replicate Therme, which is pretty much impossible in an activation, but to replicate the vibe and the feeling.
Sure. And the idea of contrast therapy is still new to many
Exactly,
people.
exactly. And our whole ethos is be well, have fun. So, wellness, but wellness that's enjoyable and social. And that really was the ethos that we wanted to infuse into the event. And I think that was really accomplished.
Well done. That's a great way to do it. So, Adam, I'm thinking the last time you and I were together, we were in a sauna for the sauna trials in the US here in New York. You go to saunas and bathing a lot, I know because I follow you on Instagram. I mean, how do you see this market evolving here in America?
Well, I still think we're right at the beginning. The wave is far from cresting. And I think what's interesting is we're starting to see the infusion of bathing culture with influences from a lot of other aspects of American culture and American leisure and recreation. And so, what I'm actually most excited about is now we're seeing people coming from the world of theme parks into bathing, from the world of immersive art into bathing, from the world of music into bathing, from the world of fine art into bathing, from the worlds of restaurants and hospitality into bathing. And so I think so much more kind of experimentation is yet to come. There's so many flavors of what bathing can be. The base ingredients at the end of the day are so simple. A hot space, a cold space, and a space to relax. You can remix that in kind of infinite permutations, and it can obviously be delivered at so many scales, from the mobile sauna with 4 people on the bench, to the thermal resort with 12,000 people, coming in a day. So there's infinite permutations between those two spectrums in terms of scale. And that's really what I'm most excited about. And I still think we're very much on the early end of people kind of taking this concept and the heritage of these rituals and infusing them with, a dynamic new spin. One of the things, obviously, that's a great strength of America is the diversity, which means that there's an openness to experimentation and maybe not the same weight of heritage that you might have in other bathing cultures like Japan or Scandinavia, where there's a sense that you have to pay homage. I think,
Because that's how we do it.
for better and occasionally for worse in the US, there's an openness to kind of tamper
Hmm.
with things and remix things and mash things up in new ways. And so that's part of what I'm very, very excited to see. And I'm basically in a bathhouse, 2 to 3 times a week at this point. And
Hmm.
everywhere I go, I connect with the local bathing entrepreneurs that are there. And all I can say is, we're still very early, and the energy
Hmm.
is so strong, but it feels like there's still a long way to go in terms of growing this culture.
So, as COO of the US group, what is your biggest challenge or worry at the moment?
That's a very good question. I mean, really just keeping us on schedule. These are big projects, these are big ambitions, and ultimately, we're all doing it so that we can open our doors and start serving customers. So this is about, ensuring that the complexity of our ambitions and the scale of our ambitions doesn't become out of sync with reality. I'm the one in the team who manages our business plan and our numbers, so I've got a closely attuned sense towards reality and ensuring that our grand aspirations can connect
Hmm.
into something that translates. It's interesting. If you'd asked me that question 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, I'm nervous. Maybe that this won't take. This is a foreign concept. Americans aren't ready for this." I absolutely don't have a shred of a doubt that when we open, we're going to be phenomenally successful. And I'm grateful, to all the bathing entrepreneurs that are blazing the way for us. Um, but um, but yeah, I think it's really just ensuring that we stay laser focused on our ultimate goal, which is not doing festivals and is not promoting the broader culture of bathing. It's about opening these civic assets that can then serve millions of people a year for decades to come.
What an exciting job. And clearly you don't think this is a fad. I mean, this is here to stay with this kind of investment.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. And if you look at the long arc of human history, heat and water have always been at the core of social rituals and community rituals. I think in the US there was a blip from the kind of 1960s to the early 2000s for a variety of factors, suburbanization, the AIDS crisis, and a few other things that led to kind of, well, I should also say the introduction of the private shower into everyone's home that led
Hmm.
to a kind of shift in bathing practice. But I think now people are rediscovering that actually bathing is about a lot more than just getting clean. It's about a spiritual and a social and a psychological recharge.
Do you think that this whole movement has been boosted because of COVID? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. I think it's been accelerated, but I don't think it's been created by COVID. I think COVID, created a moment where people suddenly realized how important it was to focus on their physical and mental health, and it led to a moment of pause that allowed people to kind of
Hmm.
gather their thoughts and take stock. I should say that for myself, my big passion of my 20s was clubbing and nightlife, and perhaps in a future conversation we can talk about how I think there's interesting parallels and overlaps between kind of club culture and bathing culture. But for me, the pandemic was a moment to reset and kind of stop burning the candle at both ends and realizing, that there's, maybe a softer and a more sustainable way to live. And so, my embrace of bathing culture kind of was correlated to some of that realization. And ultimately, life is a marathon, not a sprint. And marathon might not even be the right word, but this is not about trying to burn yourself out. This is about being healthy and being maintaining your well being.
I definitely feel that this is my impression, but younger generations are not drinking, they're not hanging out in bars, but they want to be social. And so this plays really into what the youth of today, who will be your purchaser in 5 or 10 years, like to do and see it as normal. I was in a coffee shop working yesterday, and there were a bunch of students around me, med school students, so post college, and they were all talking about a gym here that has red light booths and compression boots, and they just went on and on about how great it was. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, I love this. These are things that 5 years ago nobody knew what they were, and now it's like the young people want to be well, and they want to be social, and so you're right there at the intersection of those for the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. But also, we're an environment where we will serve alcohol, so it's not something that is
Sure.
completely banned. So there's something for everyone. But I completely agree. And one of the things that I actually find most exciting about visiting our resorts, or really many bathhouses, is observing how the affect and the vibe in the place changes from day to night. These are spaces that are wonderful to be in the day, wonderful to
Mm.
be in by yourself, wonderful to be in a more contemplative mode. But also, they can be spaces of celebration and they can be spaces of jubilation and congregation. And it can be the same hardware, so to speak, programmed with a completely different kind of software and energy.
Well, we're excited to see where it goes. I can't wait to visit one of these when they open. Thank
Absolutely.
you
I'll see you
again.
on opening day.
Yes, for sure. Dr. Adam Bamba-Tanaka, COO of Therme Group US, thank you so much for taking time out of your crazy busy schedule to share this with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa. Look forward to seeing you on the bench soon.
Yes, you too.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.